You just got incredibly lucky there. I started recording this without adjusting the volume of this microphone, so it would have been deafeningly loud. This is not a video essay. This is just a big chat about mainly my anecdotes with therapy and stuff I've noticed. And it exists because I don't see many people talking about it. I kind of want to build a very low-key podcast format on here. I really enjoy it, and I hope it's interesting to you. And I want to make it clear that I think therapy is amazing, and therapy can do amazing things for people, me included. It can help you understand and process traumatic experiences. It can help you come to terms with things you're just still discovering about yourself. It can build your confidence. It can help you learn about emotions and how to identify them and then work with them. Oh, it's amazing. However, I think there's not much critical discourse around therapy, and there are some questions I have, so I thought I'd bring them here. In my lovely mug today is just an Earl Grey tea with some oat milk. Not oat milk, almond milk. Good. Is therapy always the right thing that's going to help you? How do we make sure therapists hold us accountable? How do we address the fact that therapy is fundamentally often a business? And are there less capitalist endeavors that can provide that same kind of relief and support? Basically, is therapy always a good thing? Or maybe I should say, is therapy always the most helpful thing? Okay, I've done therapy twice. I did it for a year and a half when I was 21 to 22, and then a year and a half when I was 26 to 27. Both for ultimately the same reasons, but with very different experiences and outcomes. So let's talk about it. My first therapist, we'll call her A. I feel incredibly fondly about her. I was having a really hard time and I'd just been broken up with. I've just realized that my camera is completely wonky. Let's take that. My camera has been on the wonk this entire time. So just like, forgive me for the fact we've now readjusted. Anyway, I was going through a particularly tough time in my life. I was trying to quit drinking and I'd been broken up with and I'd lost a few friendships. And I thought, you know what? I need therapy, like now's the time. And it 100% was the time. I regret nothing. So I went on a website called Counselling Directory and I searched my local area and I found a lady that we're gonna call A. And we worked together for a year and a half and she helped me with loads, like so much. When I walked in there, I told her, I don't get angry. Turns out she was an anger specialist. And also, shortcut, everyone gets angry. She helped me with what she described as my good girl complex. And also I was getting a lot of hate online at the time. And she helped me in dealing with that in a more loose sense. I think it's quite hard to guide someone through an experience like that. Is very weird. But she also gave me a lot of practical help, specifically with my anxiety. She taught me tapping techniques and routines. She taught me things to help me calm myself down and avoid panicking. Situational tools that have proved really useful in the years since. And actually now, 2 of my friends see her still. They're people in the local area. I passed on her details. Yeah, she was so great. I think very warmly about her. And also she called me out very gently on my shit, which I now really appreciate. I remember I once referred to someone, an adult, as having tantrums, and she said, look, that kind of language that we use to describe children, I don't think is fair to use to describe adults. I think we should try and examine why they're behaving the way they are. And very gently held my hand in saying, let's not use that language about people who are adults. It's not very nice. It infantilizes them. And I found that quite jarring at the time. And that's also okay. Therapy is meant to make you uncomfortable, in my opinion. If it's working, it should be work. So those were the really positive things about working with A. Some of the challenges were that I did not bring things to her as they were happening. I am a chronic avoider. I always have been. It's something that I work on. And so I would come to her and say, oh, 2 weeks ago I had a massive fight with so-and-so. I was in like an on and off relationship. I had a huge fight with so-and-so, but it's all resolved now and it's fine. I only told her I'd started drinking again like a month after I started. I just didn't want to have those conversations. I didn't want to be honest. I'm so upset, but it's all fixed now. And that must have been really hard for her because she wanted to help. She clearly cared. And you can only, as a professional, give as much as someone lets you give. I wasn't bringing stuff to her, so she couldn't really work with it. She couldn't help me through it because I just wouldn't mention it. But yeah, she helped me with a bunch of stuff and was a really nice person, and also inadvertently provided a lot of consistency in my life. At the time, I had no structure, and I mean absolutely none. I was doing this as a job. I just started. And so seeing her every Tuesday was like one of the only things regularly in my diary. As you can imagine, being a content creator can be super unstructured. And her house was lovely, where she lived was lovely. And then as I left, I'd go to Sainsbury's, buy myself a pack of corn eggs. And then there was a flower stand. I'd buy myself like a set of flowers, maybe some tulips or something cheap. And that was like my reward. So I have actually like really positive memories of that time, even though it was quite hard on me emotionally. About a year in, I moved, and I moved quite far from where she was. I still saw her for 4 or 5 months, but at month 6, I was like, look, I think we need to wrap this up. I'm just, I'm having to commute. It's not smart. And I think I reached a point where I just wasn't getting as much out of it. I was showing up being like, what are we going to talk about this week? So we wrapped things up. My second therapist was called Dee, obviously not her full name. And I saw her from when I did get sober at 26 years old to about halfway through last year. I started seeing her because I wanted support in quitting drinking and the kind of identity crisis that came with that. So she had a therapy art background and was trained in a bunch of really interesting skills. She was also doing her master's in CBT. And actually this was a bit more structured in a different way. So she did a lot of stuff on the vagus nerve. We did some worksheets around that and basically how to get yourself out of fight or flight, which in hindsight was so useful, identifying what I feel when I'm in each of these states and how I can work with that to kind of feel better. And I also did a round of something called ILS. I think it's called the ILS protocol with her, where I had to take home this like little CD set. It's so funny. It's a proper like Discman with, is that what they were called? Walkmans? A Walkman with headphones plugged into it. It's all wired up, obviously. And it's this music which has had the highs and lows reduced out of it. So it's just like the mid, I guess. It sounds very, very flat, very strange. But classic songs, like, there'd be, my mind's gone blank of all music, but like the Beatles or something. And then more modern music as well, but like take that, I actually found a definition. So ILS is a sound-based treatment that uses filtered music, vibrations, and movement to improve the brain's ability to process sensory information. So I would put these headphones on for half an hour to an hour every day for like 10 days while I was cooking or, doing something kind of mindless, a mindless task. I think sometimes you're meant to just sit down and just do nothing or like lie down and just listen to it. But I found that a little bit hard. So I ended up kind of doing chilled tasks, sorting out the laundry, stuff like that. And another great thing about Dee is she had a wonderful cat. She's 18 years old and she would come and like sit around me and sit on my lap and like ask for a bit of attention while I was in sessions. That was really nice. However, there were some limitations. I would say one of them is that Dee didn't have a background in addiction or 12-step programs or recovery particularly, and didn't like know a lot about alcohol recovery. Obviously knew people who had been through it, but didn't have a wealth of knowledge or tools at her disposal to help me. And while that was fine at the beginning, I definitely felt like as I got further into my sobriety that would have been quite beneficial. But yeah, on reflection, all that work around the nervous system and coming out of fight or flight has actually been really helpful, and I've benefited from a lot of that information being in my life now. And actually, weirdly, one of my aunts is trained in ILS and she's always like, you should do it again. And maybe I will one day. I do wonder if it helped. I clearly felt a lot better as we went on through the therapy because I started at a crisis point, and I don't know if it was the ILS that played a role, but we can hope. So those are 2 overwhelmingly positive therapy experiences. However, I did have one terrible one. Before I found Dee, I was looking for a therapist, and basically I always look on a site called Counselling Directory in the UK. I've always had private therapy as well, and I contact 2 or 3 counsellors and speak to them on the phone. I ask for a quick phone call just to gauge if they're the vibe, and I thought I'd found the person, so I organised a Zoom session with them. This was just coming off the back end of the pandemic, so that tail end where people were still not doing that much in person. And my goodness, this was the worst. So obviously the big thing was the drinking, right? And this lady, one of the first things she said to me was, have you tried just having 1 or 2? And she was telling me this anecdote of how her daughter got super drunk once when she was 14 or 15. Now she doesn't drink anything anymore, and she always thinks it's really sad that her daughter doesn't drink. It was absolute chaos. She looked like Professor Trelawney in Harry Potter. Huge glasses. She had like a little lipstick on, like a bright lip. Very like flowy. But yeah, always have that 10-minute call before you start working with someone. I should have caught it in that 10-minute call, but I didn't, and I regretted it. There were key things that therapy really helped me with, for example, managing my anxiety and learning more about my anxiety as well, just gaining knowledge, gaining tools, very practical things, as well as more of the unpacking side of things and learning more about my own head. I have a lot of trouble understanding how I feel, understanding what's going on up here. So it did help me with that. And I absolutely would go back to therapy again, especially I've had a very weird year. It might be necessary. But yeah, I'm a huge advocate for therapy if you feel like you need it. And I definitely needed it. However, there are some things about therapy that make me wonder if it's always a good thing, and particularly when it's used as the only thing. This makes me nervous to talk about. I had a bit of a debate with someone the other day, a friend who's a little bit older than me and doesn't believe that therapy works. And I was able to contest a lot of what he said, but one thing that does play on my mind in certain cases, is that sometimes therapy can just validate you in your shitty behavior. Because ultimately you're a customer and they are a business owner and they are asking you for money a lot of the time. This is not always the case. If you're getting counselling through the NHS, then it is a little different. And the thing is, like, validating can sometimes be really good for you. If you have been shrinking yourself your entire life, sometimes you need to be validated. Do I think that should necessarily come at 60 or 80 pounds a pop? No. But for example, one of my key issues is avoidance. I didn't even know that until like last year. So I didn't know that. I didn't inform any of my therapy. And I wonder if it had informed my therapy, if I would have got way more out of my therapy, because I could just dodge things and avoid things. Like, because I wasn't being truly honest, so many sessions were wasted. And I'm the one that loses out in that sense. One, from a financial standpoint, but also I'm not progressing. I'm not having that level of personal development that you want from therapy. Sometimes the things we need to hear are not the complimentary, pleasant things about ourselves. Sometimes we need to be held accountable. And I guess this is like a second point on this. I sometimes hear about people I know in therapy and think, I wonder what narrative you're telling the therapist about what's going on here, because it's all your perception of what's happening. And I don't know if your perception is the most accurate. And that is natural human condition, right? You're not always going to be able to interpret what's going on, especially if you're someone who's being very injured. There's often two sides to a story and both people suffer. And so I've definitely been in situations where I've not been in a place to interpret what was going on from even a slightly neutral standpoint. Like, I was so hurt and so damaged by a situation that I could only see myself as being fully in the right. And honestly, oftentimes it's more nuanced than that. Oftentimes there have been harms caused from both sides. And you might just not tell your therapist about the harms you've caused. You might even not be able to see it, which often was the case for me. And even if you are giving a pretty full picture of the story, does your therapist feel they can hold you accountable? Again, it plays into that money thing. You know, if there is a financial element to your relationship and your dynamic with your therapist, then do they want to risk pissing you off? Are you someone who wants that? You're probably not. You're probably quite a fragile person, which is fine. It's okay to be sensitive. But sometimes we need to be called out on our shit. I needed to be called out on going back to that guy a million times when I was 22. That was dumb. And my friends tried. And as I said, my first therapist did her best to gently lead me in new directions of thinking when I was being an idiot. But she definitely felt held back, and it is really hard to do. You're ultimately two humans having a relationship at the end of the day. And I also think we need to take into account professionalism and training. Like, therapists are trained for many years, they do train. And I'm sure as well there's elements of like ethics training and safeguarding too that have to be taken into account. Sometimes people need a little bit of tough love, but like how do you navigate ethical tough love? And in extreme cases, you don't want to get sued. It's just a really difficult thing because self-development requires both a positive and a critical reflection on our own behavior. And it can be really hard to identify behavioral patterns that are harming us. But the therapist, the person who you're paying to examine your life, might not be able to be as clear or as critical as they would like to be, or to the degree that they think would benefit you most. Like, again, a personal experience, but I wonder how A felt when I started drinking again. A actually did have a background in addiction and recovery. It must have been really hard for her to see me start drinking again without any self-knowledge. I had no idea what I was doing with anything. And I was just being really difficult and omitting details. And it must have just been really hard for her to know what was even going on with me, let alone form an opinion or try and help. I would just dodge things because I thought she'd encourage me to quit again. We're gonna stay on the personally critical side for a little longer. I promise we'll move on in a bit. But sometimes I think a little bit about main character syndrome and how therapy has the potential to elevate that to another level. And this is the thing, right? It's so important to be affirmed, especially if you weren't as a kid. But it is a fine line, and I think sometimes being affirmed can lead to you feeling very isolated and exceptional and just make you feel like you're fundamentally different from other people. And I don't necessarily mean that in a wholly positive way. I heard someone recently describe their self-obsession as being the piece of shit at the center of the universe. I think that's such a relatable way to explain how people feel with this like really low self-esteem, but feeling like everyone watches them all the time and everything they do is, you know, being analyzed and thought about, and that, you know, that kind of feeling. I wonder how much that gets added to sometimes when you are spending an hour a week talking entirely about yourself. If you're already thinking about yourself all the time, is that healthy? Should we be getting back in the community? Again, that's something I'm going to touch on later. On a slight tangent, there's a lot of therapy speak that has now made its way into like the everyday lexicon. I think something like boundaries can be misinterpreted. So like you hear and see people explain on a very surface level that they have boundaries with their family, or they have boundaries with their friends or their work. And actually sometimes you see how other people or yourself are enacting boundaries, and it can be like, is that healthy? Boundaries are very nuanced, basically. By asking someone to accommodate their behavior in order to accommodate your reaction, I feel like you're not learning to cope with the hand you've been dealt. I'm here to learn coping skills. I need emotional resilience because life is going to keep coming at me on life's terms, and I need to learn how to deal with it. A few years ago, when my anxiety was particularly bad, I developed this real fear of the top deck of the bus. I could not deal with sitting up there. I would be gripped onto the seat. It was silly, but it felt logical. The only way I was ever going to get over that was by going on the top deck of the bus and just exposure therapy. I needed to keep going on the top deck of the bus. And sometimes, definitely not in every situation, but sometimes you need to keep going on the top deck of the bus. Another example of this is I had very bad emetophobia when I was younger, and I still have emetophobia, which if you don't know is like a phobia of vomit and vomiting and other people being sick. And I remember being in school when it was very, very bad, and a girl near me said she thought she was going to puke. And I yelled at her to get out the room. And my friend looked at me and was like, shouldn't you be the one that's leaving? You're the one that's got a problem with this. And at the time I was like, oh shit, I felt so called out. But she's right. I had the problem. It's absolutely fine for me to accommodate my own needs, but to ask someone who's struggling to accommodate my needs is crazy. It's silly. Anyway, that changed my brain chemistry. But yeah, there's obviously many nuances to this. And hopefully if you have a good therapist, they'll help you explore those. And hopefully you'll be able to explore different scenarios with them, and they'll be able to help you come to different conclusions for different scenarios. Yeah, helping you scenario plan basically. And also working out, especially with friends and family, where it might be fair to ask for an accommodation, or where maybe you're the one that needs to accommodate. And even just concluding what your personal boundaries are and then learning coping mechanisms. The aim is to live in the world. The aim is not to remove yourself or be padded around yourself, because we need to live in the society, and I want you to live in the society. I think we've got the most contentious part of the video out of the way. And so would more community engagement help with this main character kind of effect that isn't unique to therapy? This is happening across society. Would more community engagement potentially help counteract some of this, like what I'm calling main character, like the effect of the main character syndrome? Part of me wonders if this feeling of removal, or like we aren't necessarily connected to society, that we're different, is because we're not really engaging in society at the moment. As in, like, we're not doing community-based activities as much as we used to. We're not doing group therapies. I feel like group therapy has fallen way out of popularity, but can actually be very, very helpful. I think about specifically like really isolating mental illnesses. I think about bipolar and BPD, and how helpful it must be for people who struggle with those really quite alienating illnesses to then find community and speak to other people who have those and struggle with them as well. And that feeling of connection, how amazing it must be to meet people and go, oh my God, me too. And how I think that would really, and I think that kind of connection really complements therapy, because ultimately it is isolating to have mental illness, and it does make you feel separate from your friends and family. But making those connections with people in a community environment can make you feel more normal. And I wonder if there's certain struggles that benefit more from therapy in a group environment, specifically stuff like anger management. I wonder if that kind of therapy could be more helpful in a group. Because again, in a group, you're removing the shame around your behaviors, you're learning to talk about things, you're hearing other people describe what you experience in a language that you understand, and putting language to experiences you didn't have the words for. It obviously couldn't help all traumas. It's not a fully well-rounded treatment, but I think it would be really beneficial to add to some individual therapy experiences. Ultimately, we need a package of support. We're nuanced people with lots of problems. And capitalism doesn't want you to know that. This is something else, which is that like so much therapy is shrouded in mystery. We're not meant to be the experts of it. And actually that makes it really bloody hard to find a good therapist because I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know what kind of therapy I need. I looked online to try and put together a list of different kinds of therapy. There are so many, and I don't know what half of them are. There's so much more than talking therapy. There's loads of different schools of thought, loads of different practices, and they all have different aims, different outcomes. They're for different things. But the normal person doesn't know that. CBT, DBT, humanistic, psychodynamic, IFS, expressive arts, EMDR, EFT, ACT, they're just some of the forms of therapy I found online. And if you're in need of therapy, you're probably not going to have the capacity to be Googling all of those and working out which one's right for you. And there's just no real way of knowing what kind of support you're going to get from a therapist, especially if you haven't experienced any of these. Even if you're on that 10-minute consultation with your therapist and they say, oh yeah, I practice DBT, I would go, oh? And then when they explain it to me, I probably wouldn't have all the vocab or understanding to really get what that even means in the context of me sitting down with you every hour, every week, in fact, for an hour and going through it. Like I'm sure when I first started working with she explained to me all the kind of training she'd done that informs the therapy she was going to give me. But if she told me on the phone, I'm going to give you tapping techniques to do to help anxiety, I would have been like, what the fuck does that mean? I actually don't know if I would have embraced it as much, not fully understanding it. I would have thought it was weird. And I couldn't have even asked if they were going to be in the program when I started because I didn't know they existed. There's just quite a big knowledge gap as a normal person. It's hard to understand the qualifications as well. I know nothing about the qualifications. People always say, get a qualified therapist. I don't know how? If you've got the little letters by your name, I'm just going to trust you. I know, obviously I could do some research. But as I said, when you're in dire straits and you are looking for a therapist, you're not necessarily in the headspace to go and learn about this stuff and do your research. Therapists can get it wrong. I recently had a friend come to me and say that they just started seeing a new therapist and she cried in their first session and said that they were just really upset by how traumatic my friend's life had been. And my instant reaction was dump them. But the therapist put a new idea in their head that they were broken and that they were really damaged. I think that was really unprofessional. And the therapist could have handled it better, but crying in a session, like, you're only a human. Like, I hear it. But at the same time, like, the necessity of the therapist is to be very emotionally boundaried, or at least appear it on the surface, because you have a duty of care to your client. And it can be really confusing when a therapist has a human reaction because they're in a position of authority, of like emotional authority. It can be very confusing. My final point is around accessibility, which is NHS waiting lists. Terrible long waits in the UK, at least. I hope if you're in a different country that you have better solutions. There are a lot of people desperate for therapy. It prices people out. Like the fact that we have to pay for mental health help is capitalism just gone insane. That's the main thing. That's the main criticism. But then I wanted to talk a bit about Betterhelp, which is marketed as being virtual therapy. The service tells you can access therapy for an affordable price. But at what cost? I did actually do some research for this bit. The biggest example of people not being very professional as therapists is all the horror stories from Betterhelp. Some of the examples I found on TikTok were therapists eating during sessions, people being in the room with the therapist while they were on Zoom to a client, being dismissive, seemingly poor training, like every possible critique you can think of. Oh, my boyfriend's home. I'm filming, just so you know. So Betterhelp is owned by a parent company called Teladoc. They do a lot of telehealth services. And Betterhelp made up 41% of their total revenue last year. No, last quarter, at $265 million. However, Betterhelp's revenue is dipping. The paying users dipped from 476k last quarter to only 407k in Q2 2024. And last quarter, the company spent a combined $170 million on advertising and marketing. So that's why we can't escape it. The way that they're appeasing their shareholders at the moment after their revenue drop is they're saying that they're looking to grow their weight loss management and chronic care services in the next few quarters. Both these and Betterhelp are services to manage long-term chronic conditions, which means getting users to sign up to long-term subscription services. Absolutely grim. And actually, I don't know if this is still the case, but it was in Betterhelp's T's and C's that it is the user's job to check the qualifications and accreditations of the therapists on the app, which is mind-blowing. Surely they would build into the software an ability to check if someone was qualified. Anyway, to finish this video, I just wanted to share a few ways that I would go about looking for therapy if you want to start but you don't know where to begin. For me personally, I used, as I said, this site, counsellingdirectory.co.uk. It's a great resource. You can search by postcode and the accreditations are listed with the person's name. You can find out what they specialize in. For me personally, I found it really helpful. And then what I did was I emailed the 2 or 3 therapists that stood out to me with a little bit of info about why I was going and looking for therapy, along with kind of a bit about my budget and kind of what times I was available. And always inquire about budget accommodation as well, because certain therapists can see a small number of clients for a smaller fee. And then it's also worth checking your borough council for services as well. I believe there's one called Headstrong, like a service that runs across a lot of the UK, where you can get more affordable therapy. But yeah, borough councils, that's somewhere to look as well. So yeah, if you're in the UK, I hope that helps. I'm sorry I can't provide more resources for the rest of the world. And let me know your thoughts. There is more to be said. If you do, say it in the comments. I'm really curious. And thank you so much for watching. Do like it and subscribe if you're new. And also, like, let me know, should I turn this into a podcast format? I could. But yeah, no video essays. This is just me chilling. So thank you so much. And I will chat to you in my next video. Oh gosh, my knees. Oh my God. I hope there was nothing else to say, because I haven't said it.